Hi, those moms. This is Carla O'Brien, your founder, here today to interview my good friend, Suzan Issa, who is the founder of Raising a Wild Child. And I met Suzanne, I think it's like 3 years ago, remembering back now when we were in a class together and she wrote something on Facebook about she helped kids with emotional regulation. And I went, I got to talk to this woman. And we hit it off and been good friends ever since. And in those 3 years, Suzanne has created this amazing program, Raising a Wild Child. And I want to bring some specifics to you today that can help make your day better today. And she is having a class in January. And if we say some things today that you think are helpful, there is so much more that you can take in to help your child's life and your life and the siblings' life and everybody's lives go better. So I'm going to ask her a few questions today, and we're going to talk about specifics in her program. Um, I posted her bio and I'll post all her links in the group. And so you can follow up if you want to. So her program combines brain science, powerful methods, key principles, and even gives you scripts to learn how to craft your questions and your suggestions to your child. So it is so full and so much to talk about, but we thought we would start on some of the more universal things that she feels everybody deals with their kids that are struggling. First, I want to ask you, we didn't talk about this before, can you define a wild child for our moms?
Oh, thank you. Hi, Carla. It's an absolute pleasure to be here talking to you today. So the principle of the wild child came back. It was almost a reclaiming of the word wild. I used to work in schools. I was an ex-head teacher and I worked in lots of different types of schools. And I got a little bit tired of children being referred to as feral and all sorts of negative connotations to being wild, when fundamentally, for me, it's about being organic, being born free. And many of you will recognize this in your own children. The wild children are born not ever really feeling like children, or that they belong to somebody, or that there's this hierarchy or this automatic authority over them. And they know they're born entirely free and autonomous. And so much of their fight is to get back that autonomy in a world that's trying to protect them. And through trying to protect them can feel like it's taking away their autonomy. And it's finding that right balance of they are children, they do need guidance, but they also need their autonomy and will fight for it in any way, shape or form. And so that Raising a Wild Child was born really from that.
I love that perspective. And that's so unique, I think, to you, that this is who they are and what their needs are, just to be autonomous. I mean, every child is a little bit that way, but some are so much more moldable, right? And we tend to focus on diagnoses. Oh, are you talking about ADHD? Are you talking about autism? Are you talking about anxiety? And I think this is a broad brush. It's really more around who they are and how they work. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
I mean, absolutely. And I know there's a place for diagnosis and labels because it can be a shortcut to support. It can be a shortcut to understanding. But I mean, when I first met the wild children, I didn't know I was one of them myself. I was somebody that couldn't go to school from the age of 11, and I found that whole system incredibly difficult and challenging. But when I first met them, it was my first year of teaching, and I had two young boys who I didn't know were at risk of exclusion. And their educational psychologist came in to assess them and said, how did you know what they needed? What is your background in autism? I don't know what you're talking about, my background in autism. And she said, but how did you know what they needed? I said, just like every single child in my class, I just sat with them. I observed, I sat with them, I was with them in their space, and I got to know them. And I got to understand the drivers behind their behaviors. These two boys they were twins, they were about 6, and they would spend their whole day slamming a door. One would open, one would slam. And in everybody's mind, it was the repetitive motion. We know autism, this is them repeating. But when you watch them very, very closely, one was really, really fascinated with the hinge and the way that the handle moved and the movement of all the parts. And the other one really, really was excited by the sound that came out. And so I set up spaces where it was safe to look at hinges and spaces where it was safe to have a lot of sounds. And suddenly they were far more settled, and their behavior improved. And so it's absolutely about just meeting people where they're at. And just to kind of brush on the idea of the autonomy in every child, it is this understanding that we are all, as humans, we all want to belong. We all want autonomy. We all want to live our authentic lives. And we're all kind of, what's the word? Sorry, my brain's a little bit frazzled at the moment. We all want justice for all. We all have compassion. But I found that there are two groups in society. There's a group that's slightly, their need to belong is just slightly greater than the need to follow their autonomy and follow their passions and compassions. And then there's a group where the compulsion to follow their compassions and passions and their autonomy is slightly greater than the need to belong. And that's really it. When the need to belong is greater, we're able to mold ourselves and override the need and the compulsion to do what we need to do, to be self-led, and to follow our own instincts. But when the other need is greater, the need to belong is not enough to make us mold. We simply can't. And we can only do it for a certain period of time before the mask falls off as such, and it starts hurting us. And we tell people it's hurting us. And the whole raising a wild child is, I often tell people, do you know, children do tell us with their voices, first of all, they say, I can't go to school. And we kind of, oh, come on, you love school. And they go, you're fine when you're there. And they go, do you know what? I do love this and I do love that. Yeah, maybe I'm fine. We pull up their socks and we take them in. And then something just doesn't feel quite right. And it's that balance between being self-led and led by your expectations and what needs to happen. And so they tell us by taking ages to eat their breakfast, get their things together. And we go, come on, I know what you're doing. You love school. You're fine when you're there. We pull up their socks and we take them in. And then they tell us with the ailments, oh, my stomach hurts, my head hurts, my legs don't work. The real ailments that they actually physically feel, or the ones that my legs don't work anymore. I'm a cat. I can't go. I can only meow. In all sorts of ways. And we go, come on. We take them in. And they do love school. We treat school as if it's one entity when it's smells and sights and transitions and expectations and 100 things. And then they go back in, and if nothing has changed, they're like, and then they tell us fundamentally by hurting themselves or others. And then we listen because we have no choice.
I love that. You have such a great way of, yes, we need our diagnoses and labels, but really looking at what is going on. What are their needs? What are they expressing? And doing that without any rules or shoulds about, oh, well, they are self-regulating and they are stimming with those doors and, autistic language, and that needs to be changed. So then we stop them and then, things happen. So I just want to point out to the moms that viewpoint. What are they need? What are they telling us? And understanding that they're really just expressing what's going on. And it isn't this conclusive chunk of behavior that needs to be changed necessarily.
Absolutely. And the fundamental thing with raising a wild child is we only ever work whole family. And the reason we do that is because we know how frightening it is to go against those shoulds, to go against someone telling you that you should be stopping the stims. And as humans, we're evolved to feel like belonging is safety. So anything that threatens that belonging can make us feel uneasy. And as parents, when we're going against the tide, that's a huge amount of responsibility. When we're actually allowing our child who wasn't born to fit in, we're allowing them to stand out. There's a certain level of standing out that everyone lauds and celebrates. But if it's not going by the standards of kind of how you should behave, we all become a little bit afraid. So a big part of raising a wild child is helping understand parents, for them to understand themselves, why are you afraid to allow the stimming, and understanding that this isn't a judgment and we're all doing everything we do is out of love for our children. We're panicking for them. We don't want them to stand out. And working on your own fears and the traumas and the fears that it creates within the parents is key. It has to be sustainable. This isn't about just doing things that, it's not flipping it from meeting none of the child's needs to the whole world has to bend over backwards to the child's needs. It's finding a way in the middle where enough of the needs are met that children can come out of their comfort zone. Because by the time a child has stopped being able to go to school or has started reacting hugely, or the other classic where they behave beautifully at school, my biggest red flag is the goodest child in school that comes home and explodes. No child's meant to be that compliant. That's also something to be looking at. And parents are stuck in that thing where if the behavior is at home, it's the parent's fault, and if the behavior is at school, it's the parent's fault. So I have a couple of key phrases that I use with schools about that, about, do you know what, if a child was playing up all day, then the minute they saw their parents, they became over compliant, we'd be calling the safeguarding team. And so just changing that rhetoric, but so much of it is understanding what we're afraid of. And as parents feel more comfortable and hopefully their anxieties reduce, it just translates into everything else.
I think that is so powerful for our moms to hear, because I know I struggled. I'm on the other side now, pretty much. They're still alive, but I'm not raising them every day. And the anxiety and depression and stress within me, I used to say, where's the book for me to deal with not only trying to keep them safe, make the right decisions, find the right help, but the judgment from family, from the world, from the teachers. You don't know whether to be a battler or to just give up and pull them out. And so understanding our own inner workings during this time is such a powerful concept. And I know that your program addresses that. I love that you only work with the whole family. So thank you for that, moms. This is unique. And it's not that you're wrong, it's to help you be whole through this process with your child.
And even more than it's not that you're wrong, I would almost bet everything on the fact that you absolutely already know what you need to do. And it's not that you're wrong, you just become afraid when all the other advice and all the shoulds are telling you the opposite. And not only is it not working, it's making things worse. And that's the most powerless feeling in the world. And if we know anything, and I'll talk about this a little bit in the crisis arc, is when we're feeling an emotion that we can't explain, what we end up doing is trying to create that feeling in other people. However we are anxious, we will be trying to create that in others in order to create some empathy. So looking at our own anxiety as a key to reducing anxiety in others is one thing, but it is also understanding that all the Raising a Wild Child philosophy really does is give you permission to be the parent that you intuitively and instinctively know that your child needs. I had this incident with a parent who'd come to me and her daughter who huge behavioral issues, but was finally allowed a play date, and she hit her friend. And this daughter was devastated, but of course the mum's going, but I need to let the other mum know that I'm taking this seriously. So the play date ended and I'm dragging them both down the road back to the other girl's house so I can explain to the mum. And she said, and then my daughter fell in some stinging nettles. And then finally, you'll have to excuse me, I'm coming over a cold. And then finally, I could hug her and comfort her. And I said, who said you couldn't? You felt your daughter's distress. What was the fear? What was the voice that was saying that when she hit her friend, that you couldn't hug her then? And taking away this idea that they're getting away with things by consoling them and cradling them through the disappointment of their choices, when in reality, that's how we reduce the shame and reduce the chance of it reoccurring. Her consequence is how she now feels because her friend who's finally come over is now being hurt. There is no other consequence that is more powerful. And so it's leading you back to being the parent who you know you want to be. And that's kind of the power of the Raising a Wild Child program.
I do feel that, we feel like we have to correct them in front of others, right? To do the right thing, to be the parent in control. So beautiful distinction. So let's talk a little bit about, I think what you titled on the tile. I took Suzanne's class, everybody, getting up at 5 a.m. When she ran it the first time in the UK, because I really just wanted to know everything about what she was offering. So the crisis arc, and this is when they explode, getting a better understanding of what's going on, when to intervene, when not to intervene, and how to help restore them back to a more homeostatic state.
So the crisis arc was something over observing many, many children, then looking at the psychology of how anxiety runs in our body and how the more adrenaline in your veins, the less control you have over your actions and reactions. I'm going to share my screen And so this is the crisis arc that was developed from understanding how anxiety works in our bodies, what happens to our bodies when something just becomes too much, and the timeframes around that. So with the anxiety, so there's the beginning of anxiety, usually that there's always a trigger. Whether we have seen it or otherwise, something has triggered an emotion within us. And this is universal. This goes for the parent when the child has come in and is going, "You said you'd have my dinner ready, where's my dinner?" And the parent suddenly gets this kick in the stomach feeling of, oh my God, what have I created? I've got a child who's shouting at me and I don't know what to do, because I know if I say something, they're going to shout even louder and we're going to end up in this cycle. But it's understanding that something got to the point where the child is walking through the door and going, "Where's my dinner?" And the minute that the anxiety is triggered, trying to find out the cause is irrelevant. There is simply one cause. The amygdala is now awake and it is pumping adrenaline through the body. Once the amygdala wakes up, there is no point trying to figure out the cause, because all we'll do is chase thoughts that will pump more and more adrenaline. And just seeing it as the scientific fact, because even finding the trigger is pointless. When the amygdala wakes up, what it switches off is our logic and reason, because the way our brain is wired up is 200,000 years old. And when we woke up amygdala 200,000 years ago, it was because there was a lion about to eat us. And so, but the thing is, the amygdala doesn't know the difference between the old lion that was about to eat us and current lions, which are rejection, humiliation, embarrassment, all these things that create anxiety. And for a demand avoidant child, it's being controlled, feeling like you haven't got your autonomy. So a child walks through the door and they demand their dinner. And we have two ways that we can approach this. Either it's kind of going straight in for the, well, if you speak to me like that, then you're not getting any dinner. How dare you? Who do you think you are? I've been slaving away. And your own anxiety has kicked in. And what that will do is just, it pumps more and more adrenaline into their veins. If we catch it early on at stage one, so they've walked in and said, "Where's my dinner?" Anything that makes you kind of go, "Oh," I'm not sure if you're aware that you're saying that really, really harshly. Are you okay? The chances are they'll go, "I'm fine," storm out and slam the door. But what that's done is, number one, said, "Are you okay?" So they're not feeling attacked. And they've separated themselves from the situation and helped them understand that they are in early anxiety that could escalate. So they feel understood. And if we catch it at stage one, within about 15 minutes, they're able to have a reasonable conversation about it. Remembering when the amygdala has switched on, cognition and reasoning has switched off. Your brain doesn't want you to think, is it a cuddly lion? It wants you to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, the people pleasing. If we all have bad days, and I still do this, I live and breathe this philosophy, it's how I raise my children, but I will still turn around and go, "Don't you dare speak to me like that," because that day I've had enough. And that's the biggest indicator that actually whatever we think has triggered our anxiety is almost irrelevant, because other days I can cope with it. So it can't be the action, it must be how I'm feeling that's triggering the anxiety. And so I'm not in a great place, I've had a really bad day, and they've come in and said that, and I've gone, "Don't you dare, today I've just had enough." And what that does is it pumps another shot of adrenaline through the veins, and we go into stage 2 of anxiety. If we've got the second shot of adrenaline, from this point, it takes about 45 minutes for the adrenaline to leave the body. And if we try, I have parents that come to me and they say to me, "Do you know what? They woke up in a bad state and it was just meltdown after meltdown all day long." And really what it was is not allowing that first crisis cycle, the adrenaline, to seep from their body and rest before you try and address the problem or the issue. So if you get to stage 2, you're talking about 45 minutes before you can really address it. If we're still both dysregulated, as a parent, I'm feeling more and more powerless, and that makes me more and more anxious, because all these tools that I thought I had, I can't use in this situation. They won't work. And if anything, they'll make things worse. We push another shot of adrenaline and the child hits crisis point. You will all be very familiar with crisis point. It's that point of when you see the child is actually no longer in control of what's coming up, their safety no longer matters to them. You will have had arguments where, you know, those arguments where afterwards someone says, but you said this, and I have no recollection of saying that. You're so beyond, because your logic and reason has switched off. I have children that don't know their own name in crisis because their reasoning part of the brain has completely switched off. All we can do when a child hits crisis is stop and remain lovingly present. Stage 1 and 2, there is space for some sort of distraction. Are you okay? Or have you seen what I brought in today? This is not the time to address the behavior. I promise it's a delay, not deny. We do talk about it later. Once they have hit crisis, though, if you're not sure what to do, the best thing to do is do nothing. There are lots of de-escalation techniques for stage 1 and 2, which are explained more extensively on the in the class. But fundamentally, the rule is, when you're not sure what to do, staying lovingly present, which means making yourself as small as possible, not being confrontational, being behind the child if you need to be. If they're in physical meltdown where they're throwing things and they're hitting things or they're attacking you, rule number 1 is, if you feel unsafe, please remove yourself. But if you need to stay in the room or to protect somebody, it's staying as small as possible and allowing the meltdown to happen. And when you're doing nothing, stage 1 and 2 can be a good time to be scanning the room. What do I need to move out of the way? I can see this is escalating, and I can see that they're about to hit a point where they're going to be throwing or smashing, or if they're the type to chase you somewhere, if they're trying to get some aggression out on you, because remember, someone in crisis will try and create the same feeling within you. That big thing about, we always get asked, but I want to know what they're thinking. I go, they're telling you. And we always talk about behavior being communication. But if we remember, whatever feeling they're trying to create within you, that's your biggest clue into what they're feeling. If they're telling you you're stupid and useless and have no life, what they're actually saying is, I feel stupid, useless, and have no life. And it's almost like having an interpreter of not listening to the words, but trying to hear the emotion they're trying to create. And so it's trying to remain as lovingly present and allowing all those emotions to come out. Like I said, you scan the room, try to get rid of any danger. And if they're the type to follow you, you go up to a space where you know that you can contain the situation. And we wait it out. Once all that emotion is spent, then they will go through recovery. Whatever point of crisis they have hit, whether it's stage 1 and 2, as adrenaline leaves the body, we go through the other 2 stages, which is the recovery. That's when they get very, very tired. Very often they will take themselves to the ground. We never take a child to the ground, but if they want to go there, wherever they are, it's allowing them to go, because it's the quickest way to recovery. If they are safe, let them go to the ground and just comfort them through it and being there. And then the depression sets in. That's as adrenaline leaves the body, that's when we get the, I hate my life, I'm just stupid, I want to die, and all the really, really disturbing negative self-talk. And this is the hardest bit for parents, because it's so tempting to go in with the positivity at this point, with saying, but no, you're not unkind, and you're not stupid. Remember that maths test you did? And all that does is bring to the front of the mind every reason you're wrong. Especially if you're having to point out the one test they did really well in, and they're going, oh, hang on, so you're pointing out the exception that proves the rule, kind of. And the other thing it makes them think is, you just don't know how bad I am yet. If you still think I'm kind, you just don't know. And every single time we hit crisis point, we think that's the time that you're going to change your opinion of us, which is why the next bit is so important. So the temptation is to go in with positivity. The effective thing is the validation, just sitting with them, being with them, and just going, it must be horrible to feel that way. And I hit you. It's all right, but we'll talk about that later. Right now, let's just be. Let's just be, and allowing it. And you can do check-ins of kind of, I'm about to go and cook dinner. Do you want to come and help? If they roar again, you go, okay, too soon. And you just allow it. If you do need to go off, this is the point where you would kind of, the repairing the connection gesture here is so important, because if they think every crisis will be the one that you'll go off them and not like them anymore, just a little comment at the end where it's not, I still love you, because words, they don't really register. It's a gesture of, I'm about to go for a drive. Would you like to come with me? That tells them everything they need to know. And if they do say yes, brilliant, because it's the opportunity for a side-by-side chat, which is far less intense. The thing is, if they have hit crisis, you can't really address what happens for at least 90 minutes. That's how long it takes for the adrenaline to leave the body. And that's for a young child. As we get older, this crisis arc extends more and more. Fundamentally, it's my belief that the recovery is when it's actually people in nervous breakdowns who have actually hit crisis and have been in that prolonged state for so long that their body just goes, you're not listening to me, let's all have a rest. And that recovery is very crucial. And many of you will know somebody or know that after that tiredness, at first you would put it down to, I was too tired to think. And then as you start resting and recovering, you start thinking the depressive state, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? What does this all mean? Am I ever going to get back up? And it's just knowing, fundamentally, if we try and chase the reason at this point, we're just going to increase anxiety. When we know the only reason is there is adrenaline in my body or in their body, and my only job is to breathe it through and let it pass. Because there's anything I try and do will just increase that adrenaline. And I had a teenager actually call me yesterday and just go, do you know what? It works. I said, what works? Because they were always forever wanting to go on about all the reasons they're anxious, all the reasons they're always anxious. And I said, because my brain was searching for an answer. And then the script I give is not that there is no answer other than anxieties. The answer is, it's adrenaline in my body. That is the only reason I feel this way. Nothing else. And they said, and it works. And I almost had 5 panic attacks this week, but they stopped sooner. They just passed. And that connection, whereas before anxiety convinces you that the bad thing didn't happen because you felt anxious, that's the only connection your brain has. Once it starts going, oh, I didn't have the panic attack and the bad thing didn't happen, it breaks what is it becomes an untruth that the only reason the bad thing that didn't happen was the feeling of anxiety. And so our job is literally just observe it and just go, yep, this is adrenaline. We don't give it any power. We don't chase it. We don't try and block it. We just go, this is adrenaline, and we model breathing it down.
I love this so much because it's taking an interpretation of our body's messages and using it to the benefit and to maybe prevent or lessen the whole episode. But and also I just want to reiterate, it includes the mom. And I don't know if you ever saw the old Bugs Bunny where there's like the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. It might have been a Daffy Duck, I don't know, but they were they were arguing in his mind what he should do. And I think we deal with that a lot, especially with a public breakdown. If we just go hug them and tell them it's okay, everybody's going to even spew stuff at us, right? People that think you're out of control. And we deal with this with husbands a lot too, like you're letting them get away with everything. This isn't requiring love and patience. And so as moms, I know I would have the should if somebody else was seeing it. But my heart was feeling terrible for my child. And I was also feeling terrible for me. And it all depends on our own sensory profile of that moment, whether I was tired, exhausted, and anxious or whatever. So understanding that and seeing that, and then just applying simple love and patience and understanding what's going on in the brain and the timing of that is huge. So moms, I really hope that helps you reframe breakdowns, and I know if you look at the stats, a lot of us are spectrumy ourselves or ADHD ourselves or anxious ourselves and sensory ourselves. And so we're dealing with the same things our kids are, and we don't even recognize that a lot of the time. So powerful and beautiful. Thank you. I really encourage you to take her class because you're going to get to know even more about this, and it changes everything. Another big piece of your work, Suzan, that really touched me was PDA, right? And because it's not it's starting to become something people are talking about.
Yeah.
But if you have a child that's reacting to everything you ask for, it's you feel helpless and frustrated, and you do feel the need for that power and control because you do need those boundaries at times. So maybe you could define that for us a little bit and just talk. I wrote down from my notes from your class, the way to talk to your child to not trigger demand avoidance, and just give moms a little tidbit today because it's way too broad to go into too much detail, but ways they can phrase and tone and see, what's going on. Understand, just like you're understanding the amygdala is doing its thing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it's such a huge subject. And the nearest I've ever got to explaining demand avoidance to anybody who doesn't have demand avoidance is, imagine you've put your hand in a fire, and then someone comes along and they say to you, if you put your hand in that fire again, I'll give you $1,000, £1,000. Your brain will not allow you to do it. And even if they start threatening you, they're threatening to hurt you, you could be pushing your hand down with your other hand, and your brain would not allow you to do it. And that's how two parts of our brain can work against each other. Part of your brain will be going, it'll be a split second, you'll get all this money, it will be fine. He won't punch you in the face, just do it, it'll take a second. The other part of your brain is going, nah, this is life-threatening. And if you think of that fire, if we go back to that drive for autonomy, PDA, the traditional, the official term is pathological demand avoidance. I call it a pervasive drive for autonomy, because anything that threatens our autonomy is like that fire. I have PDA, it's one of my official letters after my name, not the ones I expected, but it's a whole different story. And if I can't be self-led, if I can't have autonomy for most of the time, I genuinely do not see the point of being alive. And so not having autonomy is a threat to my existence. And that's the nearest I've got to explaining the whole demand avoidance. I tell this story often. I was about 11 years old and I was walking to the dinner table and I was on my way there. And my mum said, come on, the food's getting cold, hurry up. Froze on the spot. And demands aren't what we expect. They're not just the do this, do that. They're expectations, they're the hidden demands, they're what we think people. And I was rooted on the spot. And I remember thinking, but you were going to the dinner table. You like what's on the dinner table. What is wrong with you? Just go. Maybe what you want is for them to ask you more. And then they ask me more and I rage inside. And I'm just go to the dinner table. You're ruining it for everyone. So everything that we are shouting at our child, your child is shouting at themselves. And then the other half of my brain is just going, no. And I've been waiting a long time to find the word of what we feel when we carry out a demand that somebody has asked us to do is demeaned. That is as close as I've got, is that it's, and that going back to the wild child philosophy and the drive for autonomy, we are born free. We know that, and we are born with complete autonomy. When you think your child is trying to control you or get the last word, actually, any time that we carry out a demand, what we feel like is the balance we've given away some of our autonomy, some of our freedom. And so we're down here, all demeaned, and we are now your slave. In my head, it felt like I was handing over everything, and we'll do anything to regain that sense of control and autonomy over ourselves. When we can't regain it over something that impacts us, we try and get it from other people or other situations. It's why when you're battling with your child about shoes, and we're constantly looking for that reframe because we want to talk our mind out of it as much as you want to talk our mind out of it. And then they'll go, fine, I'll wear them, but the wrong way around. And you go, oh, you have to have the last word. It's look, I found somewhere I can reclaim some control over myself. None of us are interested in control over others. It becomes a last resort. And so it's finding that balance all the time, which is why we have to choose our boundaries incredibly carefully. We have to choose our rules incredibly carefully, because the ones we choose or decide are crucial ones. And if there's any aggression or violence, they're the first ones we set, that we just do not hurt others. We can't even stipulate at that point that we don't hurt ourselves. That's a whole different conversation. So we have to choose them very carefully. And then once we've chosen them, we die on that hill. And people go, well, if you can do it by dying on a hill over one thing, why can't we do it over everything? It is because, as we were saying before, the world is created for neurotypicals. So the 10% of the time they're doing things that is outside of their comfort zone, they can cope with that because 90% of the time their needs are met. And the reason that we end up having meltdowns or breakdowns or derealization and all sorts of other things is by the time parents have come to us, 100% of the time we're living on somebody else's terms. So we can't do any of the compromise stuff. Once we start meeting the needs, and I'm not even saying we should get to 90% like neurotypicals, because the world is created in a neurotypical system, and there's a level of acceptance that comes with that. If we can get to 75% of our needs met, we can do the 25%. That means we come out of our comfort zone. And that's why we have to choose our boundaries very, very, very carefully. They have to be true. They have to be real. The reason has to be logical. We're not unreasonable. We appear unreasonable when we're in anxious mode. And so when you set a boundary, people or humans, but we talk in parent-child here because of the, when you have set a rule or a boundary, what people will do is push against that boundary. And they're testing one of two things. Will you change that boundary? In which case, you're scared of me. Number one, that makes me feel like a monster, and there's a whole level of shame there. But essentially, you're scared of me, which means you cannot keep me safe. Anxiety behavior through the roof. The other side of that pendulum is, will you react violently, aggressively, critically, in a way that makes me feel rejected or embarrassed or humiliated? In which case, you cannot keep me emotionally safe, anxiety and behavior through the roof. Which is why when we hit crisis point and we're trying to instill a boundary, it feels like it's getting worse before it gets better, because they'll push really, really, really hard against that boundary. And so remaining steady and being able to understand our own anxiety and only focus on bringing our own anxiety down and remaining lovingly present is how we can continue. We can put that boundary in place in a way that doesn't create more shame, in a way that doesn't create more anxiety and behavior later on. And it's remaining steadfast and knowing that it's the only thing you can work on is your own anxiety in that situation. And there's a few key things, the mantras that help parents. Number one is when we start reframing the meltdown, actually, instead of seeing it as distress, seeing it as being freed of emotions. And so the way we're looking at our child going, thank goodness all that emotion is on the outside. I'm not afraid of emotion on the outside. All that feeling is in there. When that feeling isn't allowed to come out and we sticky plaster it with just the CBT, all the things that just change the behavior without changing anything else, that emotion stays inside, and then we get the rise of the self-harm and the eating disorders and everything else. When I'm not afraid of big emotions, I know what to do with the big emotions. We let them out, we stop being afraid of them, and all that dormant adrenaline gets spent away, and then the meltdowns become further and further apart and far less intense. But in the short term, it's all there. And just because you haven't seen the meltdown, very often people go, no, it's quite calm because, we're now a no demand household. And you go, no, you're walking on eggshells. That's not addressing all those big feelings. That's avoiding them. We need to stop being afraid of the big feelings. When we create this safety around us, we let them all out. And anger cannot exist on its own as an emotion. It has to have an underlying emotion. Anger is a secondary emotion. Once all the anger goes, that's when you get the feelings. You'll see the tears. You'll see the sadness. You will see the real emotion, and we can work on that. That's the easiest almost to work on at that point. And so with the demand avoidance, it's not adding any more of the adrenaline through the way that we frame things, and knowing that it's a joint problem looking for a joint solution. There's nothing more frustrating for a demand avoidant person than the fact that they already know they asked for you to book this. They put it in the calendar. They probably begged for you to do this thing. Okay. But when it comes down to it, demand avoidance just goes, nah. And so they're battling their own brain shouting at them, but you wanted to, you asked for it, and you're shouting the same words at them. So it becomes them against their anxiety and the world, and they're confused, and then they resent you because you're making them feel guilty and they know that it wasn't them. Whereas a simple thing, I did this with a 4-year-old the other day who was in utter dire straits. And I said, my God, it must be so frustrating when your own brain is working against you. And seeing this child just melt.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love that. I just want to say that, again, the angel and the devil from the mom, because you're pushing the control buttons, right? But I always use this example. If we had a kid in a wheelchair that couldn't stand up, we wouldn't be going, get up, come on, get up, and making them feel shameful or being frustrated. And the 2 points are, this is how their brain works.
Yeah.
And understanding that and helping them understand that is so huge to help you with the angel and the devil, because you can't tell the kid in the wheelchair to get up. And so you have your few boundaries that you've created, and the rest are not a win-loss. It's a working with what is. So you'll lower the level of your table to push that child to the dinner table in the wheelchair. You're going to lower your need to be in charge, because you're helping them and yourself with their own inner workings to understand them. But also, so key is to not to develop shame, because they ultimately deep inside don't want to be like this, as you just described. So that is huge. And that, I think that's a core principle for your whole program, is understand where they're coming from and work with what is versus trying to change it. You're trying to help them be in charge of themselves through self-understanding, first through you understanding. And that's so different from anything else that exists out there.
And you're so utterly spot on. And it's not just about, it's about humans and relationships, and this idea that it's why so much of marriage counseling fails. Instead of working with what is and seeing how far can we each move out of our comfort zone without it hurting us, and just accepting that and finding strategies. And the key to all of human relationships is it's understanding, as you're saying, then the acceptance. Once you've had acceptance of it's just a fact, it's not bad, it's not good, it's just how my brain works, then you can have some strategies. Once the big misconception is life is hard because we're anxious and depressed. The truth is we are anxious and depressed because life is hard. So the key isn't to try and bring down the anxiety and depression. But there's a place for meds, there's a place for all of that. But before we explore meds, it's how can we reduce the anxiety down to its absolute minimum? So if we do need to medicalize because they've been through this so much, have we done everything we can? And we do that by making life feel less hard. So when you've understood and accepted and you've got a few strategies, I always give the example, I get lost. I have ADHD. My focus and attention is poor, and I could beat myself up about that. And I used to, I'd be leaving everywhere 2 hours earlier so that I would get there in time, and the shame, and I'm letting people down. And I can be walking along the same stretch of road 100 times. On the 101st, I will go blank. I will have no idea where I am. In the past, it'd have me curling up in a ball in anxiety, going, oh my God, what's wrong with me? What's my brain? It's just a fact. There's probably a sign, there's probably something there. There might be exercises I could do. I've tried a lot of things. I'm not going to beat myself up about it. Now I know I have a taxi company number on my phone, a friend who I know that I call and go, this is what I can see. Can you try and explain to me where I am? And if all else fails, I call a taxi. I try Google Maps. Sometimes I'm too fuzzy for that. And then life just doesn't feel as hard.
No, because you are who you are.
Yeah.
I call it their operating system. It seems to work with people a lot. If we just really dive into their operating system, not only what doesn't work in a neurotypical fashion, but also how they best process information, how they learn, how are they visual, are they auditory? And if we can speak to them in the places that they naturally process and the ways, I use that in the pool a lot with my students, it just all goes better. So we're running out of time. I could listen to you for weeks and days, and I did in your class. Moms, I just want you to know that, this isn't just emotional regulation. It's really all of the very pervasive and common challenges, unfortunately, that we're dealing with our kids today: anxiety, school refusal, breakdown, self-harming, things that, internet addiction. They're all, I think, birthed in this understanding how we work, accepting how we work, and as parents, help them have no shame and help them to me, that's their superpowers. And it feels hard to hear that when you're struggling. But if we can just, some of the greatest people running our world today are all on the spectrum, ADHD. Suzanne, tell us your diagnoses. Give us all your letters.
So I'm autistic, ADHD with PDA.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to see it as a superpower when it's still hurting. But once you've gone through the understanding and say, I love my brain, it's a very long journey. And I often say, I mean, I had very neglectful parents who, under every standard going, it would have been a bad idea to raise children that way. But I often say the biggest gift they gave me was leaving me alone.
Mm.
And because even though it wasn't ideal, what it did do was allow me to follow my inner drive and know that I will be okay. And my journey took 47 years to be okay with it. And what the whole aim of raising a wild child is to lose those 30 years in between of the pain, of the bad relationships, of the derealization, of the abusive relationships, of all sorts of things, of the becoming homeless, all sorts of things, because I was fighting it. And there is a chance that if we fight it enough, we might be able to change one or two of the just is. It's just going, is it worth the fight when there's so much brilliance to be uncovered?
Yes.
And I had someone come to me and they said, I'm afraid of, I don't know, I think it was lizards, and I must overcome this. I'm going, how often are you going to meet a lizard? Just spend your time doing something. We could probably do that. We could probably work on it, right? But really, is that where you want to spend your energy? Life's too short. Life's too important to be taken so seriously. It's just breathing, accepting, and trusting that it will be okay. When your child is there and you're catapulting into the future, you're dealing with the child of today, not the adult of tomorrow. I cannot promise the bad thing won't happen. I can minimize its chances by working with the neurotype as opposed to against it. And that's fundamentally what we try and do.
Yeah. And I love the message. And I just want to say, moms, underneath the message, which I believe is the truth as well, that I figured out about 15 years in, that who they were was their best shot. Right. And I didn't need to make them someone else or have them walk around. I'm ADD, I can't do this, or I'm autistic and I'm this way. And it wasn't an easy road, but I made it harder because I didn't know better. And when I started to know better, it went better. And it's still a journey, right? And there's so much to say about how much longer it takes sometimes and everything else. But I'm so appreciative of your honesty. And I think the fact that you are autistic and ADHD and PDA, that you get this at a cellular level, and that it was given to you to develop these programs that have great specifics about how we can help them and also how we can enjoy childhood more. They deserve a better childhood, and so do we. And that's my biggest regret in raising them. I was working so hard to fix them because that's what I was told to do, that we didn't really live. And I think that from a very young age, when we start to see these behaviors, you're giving us tools and understanding and wisdom to, which we already have, but we don't honor, to help our kids thrive is exactly who they are. So I just want to thank you for the time. Moms, you can find, I'll post Suzanne's URL in the pinned post I have in there today. She has a subscription group starting up that would put you with other moms, and she'll be in there, and you can see all the details of that on her website. And she has a class very affordable. She doesn't live in the US, obviously. These things cost so much here. And I encourage you to take it if some of these concepts have touched your heart, and take them home today and be more lovingly present and really become a good detective of what's going on with your child. Suzanne, any last words from you?
I mean, thank you so much for giving me the space and for your unrelenting kind of support of what we do. And if there's one thing to take away, if I can leave you with one thing, that if ever you're unsure if you're doing the right thing, it's just remembering that actually all these shoulds that the world has created now, they're all made up. You have one fundamental job and you're all experts at it, and that's loving your child unconditionally, not getting them an education, not protecting their reputation, not doing any of the other stuff. And the magic of that is when we stop trying to, it all works out so much better. And so giving yourself permission to be the parent you want to be, and the first place the love and compassion is for yourselves. It's the most selfless thing you can give your parents, your children, is making sure that you feel safe. And then the freedom is contagious.
Beautiful. Well, I love you, my friend, and I'm so grateful for the work that you've created and how many people you're helping and will help as you roll this out in the United States. And I thank you for the time because I know how swamped you are.
Thank you so much.
Okay, moms, if you have any questions, fire them up on the group and I'll do my best to answer. And Suzan, thank you.
You're welcome.